each king had their own ego, had their own sense of righteousness, and I think that each king also had his own idea of how he wanted to rule and what he wanted to do with the realm. But it was a very selfish way of leading, and I don't think that it was necessarily always with the people and the realm in mind.
Everyone, welcome, please, Helen Carr to the British History Podcast. Back, actually,
returning.
But in person. And we're here at Warwick Words History Festival. You're about to go on stage shortly to talk about your latest book, Sceptred Isle, A New History of the 14th Century. And last time we were together, we were talking about one of your other books, or the focus of your other book, John of Gaunt, of course, the Red Prince book, which is fantastic as well. But this book is quite a change in scope. That was one person. In this time, you've gone for an entire century. What was the inspiration?
He was actually the inspiration. So when I was writing the biography of Gaunt, it started in 1340, the year that he was born. It ended in 1399. So he lived for roughly half of the 14th century. And where I got to explore so much that happened around his life, the events that shaped him, major seismic events like the Peasants' Revolt, the Good Parliament, all that were incredibly important to the fabric of the social history of the 14th century. I didn't really get to explore the first part that actually influenced so much of those events. Things like the Black Death. It started in 1348 in England. That is, Gaunt was only 8 years old, so I didn't really cover it in much detail. And I really wanted to go into great depths about that plague. And I was also fascinated by his grandfather, Edward II, the tumultuous reign of Edward II, and all the myths that we are still so famous about this king, and Isabella of France, so nicknamed the She-Wolf. And I felt like Gaunt's life wasn't enough for me in relation to the 14th century, and I really wanted to try and look at this macro picture of it.
Inevitably, you have to go quite a lot into the different kings, of course, and their personalities. And what comes across really clearly is just how widely varied they were as people. What kind of impact does it have on sort of the people around them, but the country as a whole, with these men coming in with their different personalities, their different focuses even?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, because the thing is, these monarchs were human beings, and that was a really important theme for my book, is looking at this as a human history. These are people who have their own personal biases, their own influences, their own lived experience, the experience and relationships they had with their own parents are going to shape them as monarchs, and men. And I found that I wanted to take a forensic look at who these people were as characters, to try and understand how their reign and how their decision-making would impact the masses and really make history going forward. And I think that, there was no single ruler within all of them who was completely benevolent or behaved completely appropriately to the populace. I think each king had their own ego, had their own sense of righteousness, and I think that each king also had his own idea of how he wanted to rule and what he wanted to do with the realm. But it was a very selfish way of leading, and I don't think that it was necessarily always with the people and the realm in mind. It was a much smaller focus for most of these kings.
What was the immediate impact? Like, when the new king comes in, sort of how long does it take to trickle down to the normal populace? Can you get a sense of that in the 14th century? Is there enough evidence?
Yeah, there are different sources that you go to look at. When you're talking about kings, there's going to be much more documentary evidence. But when you're thinking about, the layman, like the so-called peasant classes, serfdom, you're having to look at different documents altogether, and you're having to look at things that are often quite bureaucratic or quite mundane. It's not like you're going to get a selection of surviving personal letters or diaries like you would if you were maybe a historian of the 18th and 19th centuries. It's more like manorial accounts. These grander judicial decisions being made about people within a particular region. King's bench records, so court records, give it a wonderful insight into the lives of the everyday person. And one of my favourite sources that I work on quite closely are petitions. But even then, petitions were really only produced by people who were of a particular social class. It wasn't like everybody had access to that, because it effectively costs money to be able to do it in the first place.
Are there pivotal women in the 14th century? I mean, the men are obviously very prominent, but what's the role of women?
So I wanted to include many women within this book, because I've never leaned towards a single biography of a woman. That's just not something that has appealed to me. But I do see women as a part of the fabric of a story, even if it is about a man. And so within Sceptred Isle, there are so many different women who play different roles. You have princesses. There's a whole chapter I tell the story of the Black Death through the experiences of Princess Joan. Isabella of France. She is the queen of Edward II, and she played an extraordinarily pivotal role in the downfall of her husband and of Hugh Despenser the Younger, and also the rise of her son. And I think that is something that has been perhaps overlooked before in popular histories, is how important Isabella was to the future of Edward III and his reign. But there's also the noble women of the De Clare sisters. And there's a whole chapter called Three Sisters, and I'm trying to tell this particular part of the century through the experiences of these three sisters, who were the nieces of Edward II. And yeah, I think it's important to always include women within the story, because women have often just sat in the margins, and actually they were very active as political agents in court, if they were a queen or if they had some level of social standing. But also they were the very fabric of society as laywomen. So these would be women who were brewing ale. These would be women who were effectively managing home and shop front. It's not like they were inactive participants just because they were women. Yeah.
No, I think it's a shame that the telling of history, but up till now perhaps has sort of taken that agency away. But it's great with books like yours that
I think we can. I think the 18th and 19th century historians are often to blame for that. And there was a lot of focus on great kings and battles and the deeds of great men. But actually, when you strip all of that back and you go to how women behaved and were treated, and what the sources tell you of the Middle Ages, of the 14th century, women had a lot more clout and respect than I think has been demonstrated. And actually they were incredibly active. As they said, they were business owners, they were mothers, they were caregivers, they worked within the church. I mean, women are 50% of the population, and particularly in times of birth and death, they are the absolute gatekeepers of these two major fundamental life experiences.
It's great that your book's putting them back in there. I think it feels like there's a little bit of a tide to turn on that, but with work
we're
like
fighting
yours.
it. We're surfing that tide. We're not only fighting it, we're going with it.
Fantastic. Okay, before I need to let you go, what do you hope people take from your book?
So as I said before, this is a book about humanity and human beings. And I think when we look back at history, it's often full of anecdotes, and it can feel, the empathy can feel quite difficult to muster. And this book, I think, is a very empathetic book about people and the lives that they lived and the experiences that they had. And I think that a good writer is an empathetic writer. The ability as a writer is to be able to reach into the feelings and the emotions of people and to draw them out into the writing, be that fiction or non-fiction. And so I want people to come to this and actually reflect with empathy on the world that people lived, and actually, rather than focusing on often mistruths and myths and anecdotes, thinking about what was that actual experience that somebody had, and what would that have felt like? What would have that looked like? And I hope that this book fills in some of those gaps.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me today, Helen.
Thank you for having me.